Hey YouTube, so in this video we're going to jump into Sargon's kind of rage at the definition of violence. Now there's going to be, I'll point this out here, I've seen this video, I've looked it up because part of what we're going to dig into is the death statistics surrounding the protests, right? And we're going to look at and see whether or not these protests and in what Carl will say violent riots are causing a whole bunch of these deaths or not, right? We're gonna find out, spoiler, that that's not really the case. But anyways, he's upset with this definition of violence, and I'll say there's gonna be some points against this article that I will agree with Carl on, right? And what the definition of violence is. But it's not gonna be everything. There's gonna be a lot of things that I'm gonna point out we're gonna laugh at. But let's jump into this.
In the wake of the George Floyd riots, there was a slew of articles. Why damaging private property isn't the same as violence, from left-wing propaganda outlets that decided this was actually entirely in keeping with the revolutionary zeal. This would help bring about a better world, and therefore they had to write after-action defences, rationalizations as to why, in fact, we can redefine violence to not mean smashing up someone's stuff. I didn't cover this when it happened because there was just too much going on. But I found myself in a position where I just want to go back to it because of a particular incident where a body was found in Minneapolis in one of the burnt out buildings. Now, this isn't the first person to have been killed in the George Floyd riots. Wikipedia now puts the total at 28, with $500 million worth of damage in Minneapolis alone. So the scale of this is actually genuinely staggering. 28 people have died, and for some reason, at least 28 that is, and for some reason, the leftist hacks are still going, well, actually, no, well, actually. All we're saying, Nathan, is that this obviously was not your problem. That's what it was, wasn't it? There wasn't a mob of race warriors and communist radicals smashing up your private property. Because if it was that they were smashing up your private property, you'd probably have a different opinion, wouldn't you? You'd probably...
So, alright. The 28 number, 29 the last time I saw it here. We'll see the updated stuff when we go through the Wikipedia article and list what they count as deaths for the riots. But Carl presents that strictly as protesters killing people and uses one example of the body they found in one of the buildings that was burned in Minneapolis several months ago. They found one here, would have been a little over a week ago, that showed thermal damage. As far as I know, the case hasn't been, everything has come back yet from the coroner's office. So we'll see if that was, if they tie it to the fire in the building then, or if it's somebody that was deposited there burnt, right? Because they found this body, it's why they found it so far after the burning of the building. They found the body after some anonymous tips came in, right? So we'll see if that's an actual one that was killed during, the burning down the building, and whether or not the guy who burned down the building is a BLM supporter or not. But just some context here. We'll dig into it a little further here. But yeah, I don't like with this why damaging property isn't the same as violence. I don't like changing. I understand what they're trying to do, but there's still violent action here and damaging property and stuff like that. It's just not the same level of violence, right? It's not the same thing. And there's, property damage is certainly something that you can justify, right, as being all right and the right thing to do, right? So Carl's a Brit bonger, so I don't know if he's going to agree with the conservatives and stuff here. He's not going to touch it here, but if we were talking, I don't know if he would agree with the conservatives that hold up, like the American Revolution, those heroes and stuff. Like, he's come to the defense of some of these things, the venerated ideas and stuff here. But part of the problem is in venerating those people, especially like the Sons of Liberty, people think just like, the Boston Tea Party, that was it. No, there's plenty of other property damage, besides the Tea Party was, strict there, but, and there was other violence above and beyond that, right? So they would tar and feather people. They would vandalize shops that wouldn't partake in the boycott, right? So if you're going to defend and rah 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 and raise up the founding fathers who engage in the same kind of stuff, and you're going to poo-poo this, there's a very big inconsistency, a very big hypocrisy in your position.
Probably be a lot more terrified. You'd probably be a lot more distraught at the fact that your life's work, building up whatever it is you think you're building up, has just been taken away from you arbitrarily by an angry group of people who somehow feel that you are part of the problem, your small business. During the nationwide protests against the killing of George Floyd, there's been a great deal of violence. Oh, has there? That's very interesting. I mean, you're right. I don't know how many people were injured, but it's going to be in the thousands, isn't it? 28 being dead. 14,000 people got arrested, hundreds of millions of dollars in damages, but police have blinded a woman in one eye, driven an SUV into a crowd of people, beaten unarmed protesters with batons, shot pepper bullets and tear gas at a car with a pregnant woman in it, thrown a journalist to the ground before pepper spraying them in the face, and attacked John Cusack, among other aggressive acts. Weird that you don't mention the protesters and the people they murdered. Not one death there. The police didn't kill anyone, did they? But 20...
There have been police killings during the protests, Carl, right? So there are deaths there. And like I said, he's going to harp on this 28 number. And I'm telling you people here, as we get to it here, this is going to sound repetitive to the live audience, but for the video, just stick with me. We're going to get to and work through these deaths. And you'll see that that number is much, much smaller for anything that you can link to the protesters.
28 people died because of these riots. Where on earth are your priorities? How can you sit there and go, yeah, well, I mean, this one woman got a rubber bullet in the eye. Okay, maybe, but murdering people in the streets, shooting kids in, say, autonomous zones that have been taken over by gang members and thugs, various other people getting burned alive in buildings that you've set on fire that are not connected in any way to the murder of George Floyd. These are not just bad, these are worse. This is what a vision of hell looks like. Arbitrary, unchecked violence on the streets. It's the end of private property, it's the end of productivity, it's the end of prosperity, it's the end of security. It is the end of living like a person in a first world country. But with the images of burning police cars, even burning police stations, protesters too are being seen as, quote, violent. Must be all the attacks and all the deaths and all the property damage, all the people killed. I mean, when 28 people die, that's usually considered a tragedy. Like, the average jihadi attack doesn't kill that many people, and it's news, wall-to-wall news, when a jihadi goes out and murders like a handful of people. 28 people die, and you guys are like, well, I mean, like, people are saying that they're being seen as violent. Yeah, I wonder why.
Again, at this point, we're going to get there. We're going to get through kind of the main thing before Carl goes off into his rant, and then we'll go through all the deaths and we'll finish his rant later. But that 28 number is not protesters killing people, right? Or at least all of them. There's some of them linked to protesters, right? But you'll find, as I get to your spoiler, that a lot of them are just ones that occurred in the vicinity of where the protests were, that police right now don't have any connection to the protests, but are being counted on that Wikipedia page as deaths at these protests.
Because they are violent. You know that. You know that we know that you know that as well.
But the argument to this here and why they're trying to soften the use of violence is that they're equating property damage to killing people, right? And therefore all such acts of violence against protesters is completely justified. Fuck them, right? So we covered a video on this a couple weeks ago from Sargon as well, where he's like, good, do it, law and order, all that stuff, and saying it's good. So what this article is trying to do is move out against and kind of keep the separation between the acts here, right? So killing somebody versus killing or physically injuring somebody compared to property damage, right? And keep that separate and try to keep that in eye here. So where I'll agree is I don't agree is don't separate those two things. Those are still violent, right? Those are still acts of violence, right? But they're on a scale, right? of, real atrocious things and things that are, we'd rather you not do those, but there are things that aren't something that requires the massive force and stuff that Sargon's been cheering on with the Department of Homeland Security.
This is such a bold-faced lie. I just can't get over it. It's easier to justify police violence as proportionate or defensive. Well, you're burning police stations. At this point, Portland Antifa are trying to burn down, a federal courthouse, was it? In Seattle, they did the same thing to a police station. I mean, it does look defensive. It does look defensive. It looks like you guys are lunatics and actually think that you're going to have some sort of mini revolutionary war against federal authority. Good luck with that, by the way.
So, and what they're talking about here is take the peaceful protests over something else, right? So, even if we go with the violence, the property damage that's being done in these other protests and things like that here, there are other protests that are 100% completely peaceful, and the cops are being jackbooted thugs, right? And because of these other acts, these violence, property damage stuff that's being done elsewhere, is that it's going to justify all that jackboot thuggery by the police. And Carl is perfectly well and fine to go ahead with that, right? So he's willing to play into it for his own narrative.
This is why it's very important to be clear about what constitutes violence and which harms are more objectionable. So this is you, after the fact, trying to rationalize how, in fact, your side did nothing wrong. They did. They did a lot wrong. If protesters destroy a police car and police destroy a protester's eye, both will be called violence, and it won't be made clear that what the police did caused far more human harm and is more brutal and inexcusable. I don't agree. It's tragic that this woman lost her eye because she was part of a riot and took a rubber bullet to the face. That sucks, but
see, this is the thing here. This is the issue right here, right? Is what Carl's doing right here is there. People at peaceful protests with the cops going through are losing their eyes, right? Perfectly peaceful, and it's the cops instigating shit. And now he's like, nope, I disagree. That's perfectly fine. It sucks that she lost her eye for that stuff here, but she was at a riot. It's like, no, she was at a peaceful protest. Carl, right? Quit lying.
She shouldn't have been part of a riot. B, she didn't die. And C, lots of other people have been killed by these rioters.
We'll dig into the numbers here shortly. That's not true.
This is not excusable. You are just desperately trying to make it so that all the evil lays on the other side, and that's just not true. I agree that, Derek Chauvin? He needs to be prosecuted for killing George Floyd. I agree. I agree that when a police officer does something wrong, he needs to be held to account. But I also think that maybe that doesn't give you license to burn down small businesses or anything. It doesn't matter if it's a mega corporation. As much as I despise them myself, you don't have that right.
So Carl's lying point blank. He's got the article up here. He read it verbatim. Where are we here? So, if protesters destroy a police car and police destroy a protester's eyes, both will be called violence, and it won't be made clear that what the police did caused far more human harm and is more brutal and inexcusable. Right? So they're not denying the harms or the evils, as Carl said, in doing it here. Right? They're talking about this scale. Right? And so Carl's going to play in here to justify. So he basically, right then and there, well, this protester who got hit with a rubber bullet at a peaceful protest because the cops, dived into full-on jackboot thuggery and stuff against peaceful protesters, lost her eye. But shouldn't have been at a riot, love. And it's like, where these things are happening aren't riots or aren't things where things are being burnt down, Carl. Right? And so this is what this article is trying to argue against. Now, I disagree with, like I said, my disagreement is wouldn't say that, well, the property damage isn't violence then. No, you still meet all the criteria for violence, right? So just like, and Carl will bring this up later in the video, where he'll try to use, words are violence in here, so no, are words not violence and stuff here? And so just trying to take something like property damage and say it's not violence, hurts the other arguments when you're talking about violence from language and stuff here and words here. And part of Carl's hypocrisy, he's famous for sending an MP, a rape comment. It's just a joke, and did it repeatedly over and over again. And if you missed it on his campaign, maybe I'll pull it up here towards the end of the video, but he was talking about, when he was running as for, what is it, European Parliament or whatever, for that seat, there was, all the news articles came out and started talking about the Jess Phillips, "I wouldn't even rape you" tweets. And he made a video and said, well, everybody's upset, maybe I would do it just to make them happy and kind of shit like that. So he played on it even more. Right? And so trying to pull things away from violence in certain things to fit here will harm other things when you're arguing for violence, like when you're talking speech and act, things like that aren't exactly physical. Something that can cause psychological harm and stuff like that. So that's the only point I agree with Carl on this thing in terming violence, and it's very, very slim. Because Carl's still being disingenuous.
That's someone else's. And I love this. Well, hang on. That didn't harm anyone. You don't know this. You don't know the kind of destitution that a person will fall upon once their business is arbitrarily taken away from them.
So, they didn't say it didn't cause harm, right? Property damage didn't cause harm, right? They're talking about the physical violence on the people being more brutal and inexcusable than the property damage.
I mean, I just can't understand how you don't see that as being a modern day version of slavery. Your labor is meant to be yours. So if you work on something, you build it up, you create something, it is not acceptable for someone to steal that away from you, steal all of those hours and all of that money and all of that effort that you put in to build this thing up in order to just say, yeah, I didn't care about this is not mine, therefore I can burn this. That's wrong.
Remember, kids, burning property, causing property damage, is slavery, according to Sargon and Akkad, right? All right, I don't know if he's going to mention the deaths one more time here. We're about the halfway point, and I want to get into the deaths, so we'll go a little further, and then we'll hop into the Wikipedia page, and we'll go through each of the recorded deaths that Wikipedia reports with the protests.
That is, you saying, I own your labor. Your labor, the work you've done, is mine. How is that not a version of slavery? How is it not? The word violence should be reserved for harm done to people. That is harm done to people. Not all harm, as I'm sure you will have argued in other places, is direct physical impact. There are lots of different kinds of harm. Imagine the depression I would wake up to tomorrow if someone had burned down everything I owned. I would be just gutted. Gutted. Everything that I'd built up for the past 6 years, gone in a night. I'd be absolutely heartbroken. I can't believe you think that isn't harm. And again, the financial damage that you're going to do to people. I mean, what if these people are going hungry? What if they can't eat? Is that harm? What if their children can't eat because of your arbitrary actions? Is this harm? But no, sorry. Violence is now being very, very finely defined. I mean, it used to be that everything was violence, right? It used to be that speech was violence. And I'd love to be able to, sell you a t-shirt with that on in the Ingsoc logo, but we're currently between shirt providers. But I'm sure I'll get Johnny, we'll sort something out soon. Johnny will sort something out soon. But speech used to be violence, and then silence became violence, and now burning down houses and buildings, this is not violence. Really, really interesting how you guys have got to define yourselves into knots. You just can't be consistent. Because if you were going to be consistent, you'd have to take a long...
So, he's generalizing from one person to another, to the whole group. That's saying it's not here, right? So, that's Carl's mistake.
Hard look at your own faction and say, are we the problem? Are we, in fact, the baddies? Because the answer is yes, you are. Anyway, many times the...
So, I don't think he's going to get here. We're the halfway point in the video. We're going to do some research on these deaths. So let's pull that up. I think that's right here. So let's reload it just in case there's some new pages. Alright, so this is the Wikipedia article. article, we're just going to look at deaths in the U.S., but that doesn't include the violence stuff. Let's see here, but they got a whole other thing: violence and instigation by white supremacists, stuff. So we'll look at the deaths and see what we have here in the U.S. So, May 27th, in Minneapolis, 1 mile from the main protest site, Calvin Horton Jr. died after being fatally shot at a pawn shop that was being looted. The owner of the pawn shop was initially arrested in connection with the incident, but he was later released without charges, and the case remains open as of late June 2020. Right? So, this might be from the articles and stuff that I clicked through and read. Might have been someone that was looting the shop that was shot and killed. Something Sargon would have supported, wholeheartedly as being okay. So we have, let me pull up a notepad, so by the end when we do this, we can figure out how many of the 29 are actually protesters, or that we can argue are protester deaths. Open up right here. So we have by protester. You have death by cop, death by other, right? So we have one of the 28 is a death by other. Pull this up. May 28th, in Minneapolis, federal and state authorities recovered a body on July 20th, 2020. So this is almost 2 months later at the Maxit pawn store that appeared to have suffered thermal injuries. The pawn shop, located several blocks east of the city's 3rd precinct station in an area of heavy rioting, was destroyed by fire on May 28th. A 25-year-old man from Rochester, Minnesota was charged in June for arson of the fire at the pawn shop. Right? So let's... No, I don't want that. Fuck. Alright, we'll pull this up and we'll go to archive. Control C. I'll pull this up on the other screen to read it. Seen on May 29, has cleaned up again after protesters over the death of George Floyd. Next upon seen on May 29. Authorities found the charred body of a man in the wreckage of a South Minneapolis pawn shop nearly 2 months after the building was torched in the rioting that followed George Floyd's death. Investigators from the Minneapolis Police Department, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, and the State Fire Marshal's Division were acting on a tip when they discovered the body Monday morning in the rubble of Maxit Pawn. So have they done nothing to clean up and investigate this year? I mean, they arrested the guy in June. So there's still been no cleanup over there on it? Maybe. The body appears to have suffered thermal injuries, and we do have somebody charged with setting fire to that place, said Elder, adding that city homicide detectives have taken over the investigation. He said that the victim's identity would be released by the medical examiners after an autopsy is completed, along with the precise cause and manner of death. So, Hazy Monday, building on May 28th. So a police news report is connecting to May 28th to the fire death. But this one does not. When did this article come out? About 10 days ago. So I imagine if we dug further, we'd find out what the autopsy showed. But yeah, so either they have done zero cleaning or investigation into this to arrest and charge somebody with, right? So you have to have the evidence from all that to be able to charge and move forward with charges against somebody with burning it down, to now find it here on discovered July 20th. Right, so they arrested somebody in June, discovered it on July 20th, and it was from a tip. right? So we're going to have to see the autopsy on that. But right now, that looks to be the first one. How's it going, John? Yeah, right now we're going through Carl's video. We're going through the deaths because he's playing up through the course of the video. We're not quite to the magnum opus part yet of the video where he's going to say BLM protesters are worse than the cops that killed George Floyd. We're not there yet, so and he's going to base it on this number. So right now we're doing the math, right? So we got one maybe here. This 28th seems like it. I can't find anything on the guy they have arrested. Dig in, but that one looks like maybe it was a protester and burned down there in the riots, right? May 29th, in Detroit, a 21-year-old man was killed when his car was fired upon in downtown Detroit. He was shot in the middle of a police brutality demonstrations, although police believe the incident had no connection with the protests. So we're up to 2 deaths by others. So there's one there. In Oakland, California, amid unrest, a federal protective service officer, David Patrick Underwood, was fatally shot outside a federal courthouse in a drive-by attack that also wounded another guard. During the protest, as an act of domestic terrorism tied to Stephen Carrillo of the Boogaloo movement. Yeah, oh, he says it. We'll get up to that, right? But so this is a far right, the Boogaloo movement. If you're not really, that's a far right that's looking to start a race war in the U.S. Right? So that's one more that's not there, and it was tied to somebody else. I have no idea if this one counts in their total. So we'll put one extra for right now. I'm just doing this. Right, because we won't count it if it ends up not being that way. So we got May 30th. Let me pull up my again. In St. Louis, Missouri, 29-year-old protester Barry Perkins died after being run over by a FedEx truck that was fleeing looters. So this was a protester that was died. So this is another death by other. Not by a protester, not by a cop. In Omaha, Nebraska, 22-year-old protester James Scurlock was fatally shot outside a bar. The shooter was Jacob Gardner, the bar owner, who had a scuffle with some protesters and several fire shots. Announced that there would be no charges for the bar owners. However, after pushbacks, it's being referred to the grand jury for review. So this is another one. This is a protester that was killed. And that's one of those deaths that if it was a scuffle with the bar owner and protecting his property, Sargon would be fine with. In Indianapolis, 2 people were fatally shot in vicinity of the protests or riots downtown. One of them was 18-year-old Dorian Merle, killed around 2:30 a.m. and a 20 turned himself into a police meeting. Merle had pushed him down and was subsequently charged with murder on June 2nd. So let's pull this up. Arrest made in fatal shooting of 18-year-old man is now. Pause that. Tyler Newby, 29, was booked in Marion County Jail on Sunday, criminally charged with murder according to Marion County Jail record. Announced Tuesday that Newby was arrested for a suspected role in shooting, reported shortly before suffered multiple gunshot wounds in an incident that was taken to hospital. Police have not released any information about the circumstances of the shooting. A police report for the incident does not indicate whether anyone else was injured. Protests that grew violent. Also slain was local business owner Informia. Here. BA 38 suffered. That's the other one. Gunshot wounds and shooting reported shortly before months. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Does not say who shot him in this particular one. Let's look at some of the other sources. What do they say? Maintaining. Merle had pushed him down and was subsequently charged with. So it's a white guy who killed the black guy who pushed down, right? So is Newby a protester? Or is he somebody who's a counter-protester? Or somebody that, you know, caused shit around the Black Lives Matter protests at the time. I don't know. Well, that's in the same article, so it doesn't say anything about who shot him or anything there, so we don't know who shot them. This one's unknown. Downtown, does this give further details? Wait for the ad to stop. I want to listen to the local ad, and we'll figure this out.
To murder after a deadly shooting in downtown Indy over the weekend.
Yeah, new court documents show the suspect admitted to shooting 18-year-old Dorian Morell early Sunday morning.
Fox 59's Jesse Wells has more on that man's reasoning for opening fire and how the victim's family is remembering their loved one.
During a chaotic few hours early Sunday morning, IMPD officers were called to the intersection of Pennsylvania and Market and found 18-year-old Dorian Morell shot one time. Morell died after being rushed to the hospital, devastating his younger brother.
And we're going through a lot because, for me, he was like the glue that held us together.
Armand describes his older brother as a loyal
very hard to
friend
tell.
who just graduated high school and had
I'm not even sure if it was at a protest either.
He cared about everybody, and if he said he had you, then he had you for real.
Armand says his family is relieved to know that 29-year-old Tyler Newby is behind bars accused of the killing. According to court records, Newby claimed he was pushed to the ground and saw Morell standing over him, so he shot Morell one time. Newby then turned himself into police and explained what happened. Witnesses told police Morell did not have a weapon on him when he was killed. In a separate shooting just a few hours earlier in downtown, well-known former IU football player and local entrepreneur Chris Beatty was also shot and killed, although the two killings don't appear to be connected in any way. Newby is due in court later this week. So far, no one has been arrested for the murder of Chris Beatty in downtown in a separate shooting over the weekend. Anyone with information on that case is still asked to contact Crime Stoppers. Jesse Wells, Fox 59 News.
Let's go.
No.
This is the first rocket to get humans.
We'll get it there. So we'll put both those in an unknown category. We'll add one more category. There's nothing to suggest there were protest deaths. So 2, right? Why do I keep doing that? So May 31st in Kansas City, Missouri, 50-year-old Marvin Francois was shot and killed by robbers while picking up one of his sons from a protest. I'll lose my place here. So let's see the news story. It's going to play. I mean, this is a protester's dad that was shot, and they're saying robbers. So was that part of that there, or was it just some random? That's it. So nothing on it. Kept toward the back of the protest lines Sunday, camera in hand, the hobbyist photographer wanted to document the most peaceful corners of the demonstration against police brutality and civil injustices. One of the last photos taken by the father of 4 was Kansas City Mayor Quentin Lucas. So it was at a peaceful protest. This very well could have been just, a crime being committed that unfortunately was completely unrelated. Yeah, so I'm seeing nothing. So, I mean, it's a protester that's dead, right? So I imagine it's not by the protesters, by somebody other. So I'm gonna throw it in the other instead of the unknown, just because he was a protester and it was at a peaceful location, taking pictures of the mayor and stuff. So by robbers. So we'll throw that in the other. In Chicago, 32-year-old John Tiggs was fatally struck in the abdomen by shots fired inside a Metro by T-Mobile store while walking into the building. His built during the looting in the city's south side. Right. So looting. So you can whether or not you want to call that protest, it's something we can throw in there as a maybe. So we'll throw 2 there. That's probably going to be your closest to it. Let's just check the source. I mean, and it's also looting, so it's not necessarily the protesters that would have done it, right? It would just be another crime of convenience with the circumstances around the unrest, and not necessarily someone who gives a shit about protesting police brutality. Become a correctional officer gunned down after getting into an argument in Englewood. Well, Chicago was rolled by another day of protesters in the wake of George Floyd's. 18 people were killed Sunday. International crime. Yeah, they're talking about all the unrest and the murders and stuff, so. Because it's unknown, but that, you know, it's directly tied with something I was doing with the looting. We'll throw it on the protesters for the sake of argument here. We can make the argument later on what we want to, if we want to move it to anywhere else. In Riverside, Illinois, 22-year-old Mike Quan Blanchett from Chicago was fatally shot by gunmen during the looting of the North Riverside Mall. Like I said, there's probably a mistake on my part having the looting, all looting, being tied to protesting it, right? Might not be the best way to do it, so. We have a fatal shooting during Sunday's looting outside the town's mall. The 12-second clip shows a gunman in pursuit of another man. We're not gonna play that live. We're not gonna play that on Twitch. No, I'm not interested. I need an ad blocker. So they don't have any information on it, right? But it's tied to the lootings. Pull that up. We'll be super generous just in the case for putting this together against Carl's argument, right? In Louisville, local restaurateur David McAtee. Oh, this is a fun, not a fun one because he's dead, but nothing to do with the protests. This guy owns a barbecue place, and they were having a gathering after curfew. The authorities stated that the patrol returned gunfire after McAtee fired at them. McAtee's gunshot occurred after the patrol appeared to fire a pepper ball into McAtee's restaurant, nearly striking his niece in the head. According to McAtee's sister, the gathering was not a protest, but rather a regularly scheduled social gathering in which McAtee served food from his barbecue restaurant. Investigation of the killing is ongoing. So this is one by the cops. This is a death by cop. And of somebody who wasn't a protester, right? It was somebody in their business being attacked because they had a gathering after curfew. In Davenport, Iowa, 2 people were fatally shot on the night with significant rioting. One of the victims was 22-year-old Italia Marie Kelly, killed in an apparent random shooting as she was leaving a demonstration. So she was a protester that was leaving here. So completely random. So this is a shot by other. Right there, just in there. Another person, Marquis M. Toussaint, was found dead at the scene of an ambush on an unmarked police truck that left the police officer wounded. So I'm guessing this was protesters that went after cops, and the cops killed them. So this would be a death by cop. The name of the man who was found dead at the scene of what they say was an ambush on police officers. Assuming that the police report is correct, right? Men fired several times at the truck, wounding the officer who was driving it. Another officer returned fire. Alright. So this was a death by cop. I mean, still violence on... Alright, so... In Cicero, Illinois, 2 men were fatally shot in separate incidents following an afternoon of unrest. This was confirmed by Cicero police. The shots were fired by outside agitators. The 2 men were both described as bystanders, or identified as 28-year-old Jose Gutierrez and 27-year-old Victor Cazares Jr. So let's... So these are outside agitators, according to the... You wonder why nobody goes to these goddamn sites anymore. Or why everybody's gotta get ad blockers up the wazoo. Shadow the peaceful protest for the third straight day. Intensified state's response to civic unrest that has erupted since the police killings. Even as Governor battle Trump the national stage. You can go home. Police chase away those gathered near the store in search of the SWAT officer. But 1 man with mace. Let's... Earlier in Naperville, Mayor, the intersection of Washington and Chicago streets with black men. Mr. 16 visual. It confirmed 2 deaths Monday. The police said that more than 100 officers were dispatched. These are all times. So I don't see what they have on the deaths. So we'll go with the outside agitators. Unless they're... That's the spokesman said that. Oh, they were bystanders. True. Zion Haygood was charged with first degree murder for an alleged fatal shooting at Goodyear's about 7 p.m. Monday in the 2100 block. At the time of the shooting, Konami said that the suspects were looters who are not Cicero residents. Haygood is from Chicago. Anania later clarified. Like Goodyear's had not been involved in any looting and was just a bystander when he was shot. Outside agitators doesn't seem like they have for Monday. You'll see on 2 men were found hiding in the back of a looted liquor store. Surveillance video showed at least a dozen looters ransacking the store. A gun in the backpack along with the pipe, both been arrested. Alright, so still got also the employee. You gotta love the guy who just had his store looted. This can all be replaced, life cannot, which is kind of the point of the article that Sargon is upset about. Do not use batons to make or subdue some of the looters. Police dog was let loose, but the damage was done. They say it here in the video?
Done, but Chet Patel, a friend of the liquor store owner, brought to tears.
And I said,
Cleaned up.
call him up. Call him up.
Some of the looters were trapped inside.
There's 2 guys in here. There's 2 guys in here. There's 2 guys in here. 2 guys in here. Hiding in here. They're inside. They're hiding. 2 guys in here. Right here. These are right here. I saw some movement in the top. I said, wait a minute, we don't have nothing up there. No, you gotta.
Definitely very intense inside, but Cicero police, they responded very quickly. As you can hear, there is a lot of activity here still in Cicero. Police are telling people to simply stay home, let them handle this, and as
Yeah. All I can find is outside agitators, so we're gonna throw those in the other. Up to 9. Oh. In Las Vegas, police shot and killed Jorge Gomez, who was walking among protesters who was shot. In a separate incident, police Shane Michelonis was hospitalized by Edgar Samaniego. Or some protesters New Circus Hotel and Casino. Right, so let's look and see what happened in this one. Arrest suspect in shooting of LFMET. Las Vegas police suspect in shooting of officer. Police officer Shane Michelonis in great condition. Dispersed from the area of the courthouse, an officer fired several shots. A low lethal cause Gomez turned northbound. That's a death by cop. Philadelphia man fatally shot by the owner of the gun shop. So that is a death by other. In the 4th day of unrest, a 24-year-old man was severely injured after attempting to use an explosive device to destroy his. So the guy killed himself by trying to blow up an ATM, right? So that's a death by other. Right, because he didn't kill anybody, he killed himself. 70-year-old David Dorn was shot and killed by looters at a pawn shop. So, again, I have a hard time saying the looters are same as the protesters, so it's probably not the best category, but to give the most leeway towards Carl in this argument to argue against it. Here, we'll go through that. So, in Vallejo, California, Sean Monteros, a 22-year-old man, was shot and killed by police while on his knees. 15-inch tucked in his pocket, said mistook for a handgun. So this was a death by cop. Remember, he was using all of these deaths. Just looking at the numbers we got here, Carl uses all these deaths as one as being deaths by the protesters. Right? And as we're seeing, very few of them can maybe be pushed that way. Right? And several of them were protesters that were killed by what seemed completely random violence. Bakersfield, California, Robert Forbes, a 50-year-old man, was killed after being struck by a vehicle while marching between California Avenue and Oak Street. So this was a death by other. This was a protester who died by someone driving. To 12. In Seattle, a 19-year-old man was killed and another person was hospitalized with life-threatening injuries after being fired on multiple times by a self-proclaimed security force inside the city's Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. So that one in the chop. Ooh. Wait, our numbers here. Got one there. A shooting occurred at Jefferson Square Park in downtown Louisville, Kentucky during a protest. 27-year-old photographer who supported the protests against racism and police brutality was killed. Another person was injured. So this was an overnight camping situation. So let's see. I can open up. Lives Matter protests in Louisville, Kentucky. Authorities are... That is at least the second shooting incident. So this is social media videos appeared to show one man shooting into the park as people ran for cover. So there was protesters camping out in the park and somebody came in and fired on him and killed this guy. At least based here. So this is a death by other. This isn't a protester that was killing somebody. I mean, seem pretty inflated numbers to try to tie this to this when it's looking like many of these are completely unrelated to protesting there, and we're being a little generous with saying all looters are the same as the protesters and giving it to Wade here, but as you can see, it's not going Carl's way. 16-year-old boy was killed. 14-year-old critically injured with a Jeep Grand Cherokee after being shot in the Capitol Hill organized protest. But please, let's look at this one. By the protest security forces. Right. This one I think we might change because I remember this one's a little sketchy. So, damn. CLP party down near the Capitol Hill. Area 3M found a Jeep Cherokee riddled with bullets. Susan Gregg smoked. 14-year-old. Monday morning outside Jeep, it was abundantly cleared by people and gone through the vehicle after this shooting, according to Chief Best. I don't like that. During the chop at the time of the shooting, people were not cooperating, according to Chief. There's no suspect. So nothing in that one. The Fox News one. Say alright, so I'm not saying this would justify it, but if this is true, somebody... Yeah, I'm not seeing anything. So we'll, for sake of argument in this here, we'll put that down as the protests. Right, it looks like it was death by them. How it led to that, we'll have to find out more when that information comes out. In Atlanta, 8-year-old Sequoia Turner was fatally shot by a yet unknown suspect when the driver of an SUV, in which she was a passenger, tried to get past what police say was a makeshift roadblock manned by various armed individuals near the site where Rayshard Brooks was killed in June. 19-year-old Julian Conley, one of the men who had been at the scene, turned himself into the police after his photo was released as a person of interest. Conley said that he was armed but did not use his weapon when he witnessed the SUV hit one of the men on the roadblock, who then fired at the vehicle, right? So it sounds like they hit him, but that's still... Throw that way. Just for sake of argument with what we're going here. So even if, say, you know, whoever's parents was, you know, up to no good and trying to cause some trouble around that, or if it was just a thing of confusion, right? In Indianapolis, 24-year-old Jessica Doty Whitaker, this is the weird one, was killed after she and her fiance got into an argument with a group of 5 people. Blackman Whitaker responded to chants of Black Lives Matter. So these weren't protesters. This is just a random group of people, right? They seem to be associated with, or they seem to support Black Lives Matter, not associated with, was hit by gunfire and later died. Now this is the big story conservatives were pushing, right? So this is I'd say a death by other, right? Because these aren't protesters. These are just 2 random groups that got into an argument, right? You know, I bump into some black guy on the street, and you know, my group of, you know, a group of white people walk in, bump into a group of black people. We start arguing with each other. Racial epithets supposedly were thrown by Whitaker. It doesn't excuse her being shot and killed, but these aren't protesters. These aren't in any way the incidents there, right? So I'm gonna go by a death by other because it's not a protester. Just because they supported Black Lives Matter and there was a disagreement between them too, right? In Austin, Garrett Foster was killed in a shooting at a Black Lives Matter protest in downtown Austin. The incident happened on East Congress Street. In an update, police said initial reports indicate that Foster was carrying an AK-47 style rifle when he approached the suspect's vehicle. Witnesses claim that Foster had pointed the rifle at the vehicle. John Foster is then taken to the hospital where the suspect was shortly detained in cooperative. So this just happened a few days ago, so we don't have here, right? And the sounds of it, this might have been a protester that walked up to the wrong car. Like if this is all true here, and he got shot for waving his gun around at somebody who had a gun in the car, right? Just from reading that. So what do we have? We got 19, 26, 28. And so that one extra's got to count in there for 29. Right, so that is our... Just from reading this stuff, that's our final tally on these 29 deaths, right? So 16 by death by other, either not associated with the protests or the 2 deaths by the Boogaloo member that are included in here, you know, far right racist. The death by protester stuff is loaded a little bit more, assuming that the looters are the same as the protesters kind of thing, and that all looting is associated with the protests and not just, you know, a crime of convenience, you know, based on the situation as it is. But for sake of argument with Carl's point, we'll lump them all together into the protesters, and we got 7 deaths. We have 4 deaths by cops, 16 deaths by others, and 2 that seem completely unknown, right? Like, the police have no information about where it was. They just were in cities where protests were going on, right? There doesn't seem to be any information coming from police. And some of this might change as the cases, the suspects that they do have and have tracked down or whatever and arrested and charged, their trials go to court. Some of these might move around, and some of these might end up moving out of the protester realm, right? So let's jump back into the video.
The violence of a riot or protest is taken for granted. Yeah, it's weird how this violence has been normalized, and then after it's been normalized, you're like, well, actually, is it even violence? I mean, you could say the thing about rape. Could you? Rape culture. Like, isn't this all taken for granted? Isn't this bad? Oh, no, it's okay when you guys are doing it. We see store windows being smashed, cars being turned over, etc. It seems as though there's nothing to discuss. This is a violent protest. Yes! That's exactly it. But if the car or store is empty, it may be that nobody is actually hurt.
So, again, the point that they're trying to make in this current affairs article is to differentiate between the damage done to people, right, by killing them, and that's the deaths he wants to run to, all 28. And as we look, there's maybe a best right now based on current information. What was that? It's 15, 28. Maybe 25% of the 29 deaths associated with this are quote-unquote protesters killing people, right? And a vast majority of them are just things that happen around the protests that seem to be completely unrelated, or people that are actually targeting protesters, right? And not in self-defense either. But yeah, so they're by definition, the property damage is still violence, right? It's just the difference between, you know, somebody getting killed, somebody being permanently injured, physically and stuff like that is different than the harm done by damage to property, right? That's the whole point of the article. And Carl's going to harp on, the changing definition of violence, right? But I mean, he's the one that earlier in this clip, he had the gall to say that property damage was slavery. Just mull that one over for a little bit. We're not quite to the other one that comes in here where he's going to push hard on the Black Lives Matter protests in general being bad. Right? So and what's funny, and this is just kind of popping in my head as we do these live, is he'll play up, these are just random individuals and stuff like this for everything else. But for Black Lives Matter protests, all looting, everything, any kind of death associated with is all Black Lives Matter's fault because he doesn't like Black Lives Matter, right? So he has different standards for white nationalists and white supremacists and people like that, where it's just an individual thing. It doesn't represent the rest of the white nationalist movement and things like that, which is a weird take you want to come off from, Carl, when you want to show that you're not racist.
How do you know until you check? It's not like they've got permission to burn this stuff down. It's not like they were being diligent or something, is it? And even then, it's not yours to burn down. You don't get to just burn that down. There is harm being done. There is injury being done. It might not be blood and guts, shooting on the sidewalk or something, but that's not the only form of violence.
Hey, good for you, Carl. You got the point of the article, but you're still going to do what the article is trying to argue against, is conflating the two and then justifying police violence against protesters, especially the peaceful ones, right? You defended, too bad, you were at a riot, you lost your eye. And it's like, no, a lot of people have lost their eyes at peaceful protests because the cops, engaging in jackboot thuggery, right?
It's not the only form of harm. If the protesters have not actually injured anyone, they have done less violent harm. Yeah, well, they have. They have. 28 dead. 28 dead.
We got 7 at best for Carl's position, based on the current information by protesters and looters and stuff like that, right? 7 at best, right? So not even 1 in 4 of the deaths listed on here are, because of protesters and stuff, right? We got 4 by cops, right? And then we have, all the others, including, Boogaloo members, right? And if we want to talk about burning shit down, it just came out that, remember Umbrella Guy who started the fire in the AutoZone in Minneapolis? Report just came out a few days ago. White nationalist, right? Set the fire. So completely unrelated to the protests and stuff. So even then, not all the burning, the fire, and the property damage, right, are because of this, right?
They have done harm. What now? Are you going to change your position? Are you like, well, actually, maybe they are being violent then? If, on the other hand, we conflate damage to people with damage to property, as if people don't own their property, and as if people are not their own property, then we might think that the side that has physically harmed no one but damaged a lot of property has been more violent than the side that has physically harmed many people. Yeah, but that's not you. Your side has physically harmed many people, many people, and physically harm many people's property, which is an indirect way of harming them. I mean, how many years of a person's life gets washed away when you do something like this? It's so bad.
Again, property can be replaced, right? Lives cannot. Right? Yep. Nazi biker, right?
It's so bad. And the common refrain will be, well, they've got insurance. Well, do they? 50 to 60% of small businesses have insurance that would cover damages as a result of burglary, according to a spokesperson for the Insurance Information Institute. So how many of them have insurance that would cover mobs of peace? You know, riots of peace. How many, like, riots of...
Gotta love that euphemism that Carl wants to use. But burglary and stuff like that and looting and things, those 50 and 60%, that's covered, Carl, right? Even if it's more than one person coming in and doing it, right? Now, more small businesses should have insurance. A lot of small businesses try to skate by without that stuff because they can't. They run really tight, really, you know, especially in poor communities and stuff like that. They'll run without insurance and stuff. It's not a good idea. But then beyond that, the cities and the states can provide aid as well to small businesses and stuff like this that get down that don't have the insurance coverage, right? That's something we can do to help make those people whole, right? Because you're not going to be able to sue for, you know, some looter for millions of dollars and get that millions of dollars in recompense, right? There's just because people just don't have that money that you're suing them through. So the cities and the states and stuff can provide aid, right? Just like we provide aid to foreign countries and stuff like that. We can do the same right in here. And then, you know, saying that, Carl, would be, oh, but we're a first world nation. We shouldn't be treating our, allowing third world nation stuff going on and then paying to repair that in our own countries. But I mean, that's an option to help, you know, make people whole who have lost property in this.
Justice. How many have insurance for that? Probably not all that many. I imagine a lot of them lost a lot of money.
50 to 60% that have insurance that prevents burglary, right, would cover, you know, arson and all this other stuff, right?
A lot of people's lives have been ruined, and again, 28 people have been fucking killed.
Yep, 75% of them weren't killed by protesters or looters or rioters or anything like that. And the 25% that we are granting our protesters, some of them are still questionable, right? Because not all looting is associated with the protests. Remember that. So there's more information that's got to come out. So that number might drop even further, even lower.
One reason it's important to maintain a clear concept of what violence is and isn't, is because true violence. Oh, now we've got true violence. We've got not real violence, and now we have real violence. Thank you very much for saying right now. True violence is power plus privilege or something, right? Isn't it? It's such a deeply terrible human experience.
I mean, he's trying to associate completely different things in there, right? So, again, it's property can be replaced, right? So even if you don't have the insurance to cover it, your city, right, as they help rebuild, can reinvest in there and stuff too, right? And so they can help make you whole and give that property back and restore yourself to what you were before you lost it. Now, it sucks that these things have to go this way and have happened to your property and stuff, but that's one way. But when you're dead, there's no coming back. You're dead. And so that's what they're getting at.
Actual violence leaves people with brain damage, nightmares, disability, and trauma. Why would you think these people aren't traumatized by race warriors running around screeching, "Kill Whitey," and then burning down property? Why would you think that wasn't traumatic?
Who's running around saying, "Kill Whitey," Carl, right? That's your own little fantasy that you want happening.
I can only assume it's because you weren't involved. You didn't have that in your face, at your door. God damn, man. And I love this actual violence. Like, we need to start splitting hairs about violence.
But let's go with something like a car accident, right? So I was in a car accident, right? Like, you know, I'm glad I'm earlier this year in January or whatever, slipped icy roads, lost control of the car, and slid into a barrier, right? Luckily, no physical damage to me or anything there. That's great. Here, I can get a new car, right? Even with insurance, even if there's a bit of a financial stress in much smaller case instead of losing your business, right? But for a lot of people too, like in owning businesses and stuff, small businesses, a lot of those buildings are actually owned by large companies that you just rent the space out from them, right? So a lot of property companies go buy up a lot of these things and rent that stuff out, right? So even if you didn't own the building or whatever, the building burning down isn't necessarily your fault and would be covered by the property manager's insurance, right?
Like people taking things away from you, like your eyesight or your home or your business, is not all unacceptable. There's some parts of that are acceptable to Current Affairs magazine. This is disgusting. This is actually disgusting. The destruction of human bodies is a moral horror that simply cannot exist in the same category as breaking objects. So, I mean, at least we agree the Soviet Union was the worst thing that human beings have ever done in all of human history.
And he's got to go run to the communist stuff here to try to fit all his narrative. This is the worst thing coming here. And on tomorrow's stream, we're going to do another video because it's more of a rant and more a delve into Carl's mind about new atheism, right? So we'll talk about that. We'll get there here. But this is just a little snippet of kind of how Carl's mind works to try to twist everything into his narrative.
The destruction of human bodies is our measurement, but again, 28 dead.
75% weren't done by protesters or looters, Carl. Right? Some of them were completely random. Right? Others were Boogaloo movement members. Right? Killed 2 people. Was a single Boogaloo movement guy. Right? Others are, like the one we brought up. The guy tried to blow up an ATM to get money, killed himself. Right? Is that him killing somebody else or anything there that you look at? Carl had read that and seen that, probably laugh about that on stream. Others are looters being killed by business owners, right? So it's something he would defend. So trying to lay 28 people dead on the protests and even just on like the looting stuff is just not correct.
28 human bodies destroyed, and some of them in horrible ways. Just arbitrary gang violence or burning to death. Like, this is genuinely amazing that this shitheel will sit there and go, well, actually, real violence.
And the burning to death one was something they found months after the building burnt down, and they got it from tips. It was July 20th, I think they found it. So either... And they already arrested and charged someone, so they would have had to have some evidence to charge that person. So either they didn't do enough of a cleanup in the 2 months prior before they found the guy, or it's possible that it's a body that was killed elsewhere, then burned it through and to where this place had been burnt down. Right? We'll see with the autopsy. Not trying to get conspiratorial, but just based on the timeline of events, it's a little suspect.
Man, I tell you what, whatever the no true violence is, I hope they never use that against you and your property. I hope you don't get your car burned out or stolen or your house and windows bricked in, because that would be not real violence. I mean, I should be able to call for that to happen. And you say, well, I mean, he's not calling for violence, is he? Obviously, don't do this. Don't go and destroy his stuff, because to me, that is violence. And I'm sure to YouTube, that would be violence too. But to Nathan, that's just fine. I'm just going to...
So he's not saying it's just fine. So the whole point of the article was trying to separate the two, right? Because when you conflate the two, you do what Carl did in this video, and you justify the police violence against peaceful protesters elsewhere, right? Because the 28 bodies dead that he wants to latch onto.
I'm going to skip through the other points because I've already addressed them. More simply than being a definitional quibble about a particular term, defining violence carefully is about making sure what happens to people is placed at the center of our analysis. The destruction of people's property is something that happens to people. In fact, it is violence that happens to people. What happened to George Floyd is not the same as what happens to a looted target. And while there are those who want to say the protesters are as bad as the thing they're protesting against, no, they're worse.
Right there's the glory, right? So, all the protests that have been going on are worse than the police violence that led in George Floyd's death. There's several other instances of police violence that have led to deaths during the time here, right? So, another one before, I think happened before George Floyd, was Breonna Taylor is also part of the protest. What's his full name? Mr. Richard's death is another one that's part of these protests. So he's saying the protests about these things are worse than the people killing them. This is Carl's brain. This is brainworms all over the place.
That will only be the case when the protesters start pinning innocent people to the ground and squeezing the life out of them. We need to keep the moral differences clear. Man, that aged badly, didn't it? 28 dead people later, just
75%, we're not done, as we just did in this video. If you get to the end of this on YouTube, or if you come see this clip on Twitch later, 75% weren't done by the protesters, right? Or weren't protesters killing people and stuff there. And the 25% that we're granting Carl is, kind of padding the numbers his way the best we can do. And we'll find out more as these cases unfold if we're right to throw them in that pile for him.
People dying, burning to death, being shot, being beaten, and way more than were killed in the George Floyd murder. Do you accept now, Nathan, that in fact you were wrong? That it is violence? I mean, even by your own redefinition of violence, which I do not accept, the protests are worse. The protests are killing people. Running cover for this is a disgusting dereliction of one's moral duty, because you have a duty to try and maintain a well-ordered and just society. And I realise that you will say, well, George Floyd, not just. I agree. That policeman needs to be held to account. But you don't hold people to account with a mob. You only hold innocent people to account by burning their things down, by burning their shops down, by burning their houses and their businesses, by looting, by beating, and by killing. You do not hold the killers of George Floyd accountable.
So again, you're taking smaller subsection, right? The protesters, that if we're going to say all the looters and riotings are, because the protesters are not just, oftentimes is the case in these situations, someone takes advantage of the unrest. Not saying that all the protesters, all the looting is completely separate from that, but that not all the looting and rioting and stuff is the same. But like we did in this video, and we pointed out, and I pointed out when Carl did it, Carl uses that smaller portion to attack the peaceful ones, to justify the violence done to the peaceful protesters that we've seen all over the place, right? We've seen a shit ton of police brutality against peaceful protesters, right? And in that 28 number dead, 4 people were killed by cops. One as such was at a gathering that had nothing to do with the protests. But because the gathering extended past the curfew at this restaurant, the cops came in, started firing pepper balls and stuff like that in there, at least according to the restaurant owner and the family and stuff like there. And that's when the restaurant owner fired back and the cops killed him. Right? So they attacked something that had nothing to do with the protest, but because of the curfews in place, the police got violent, right? But Carl's going to treat that person's death as protesters being violent thugs and stuff. And it just goes to show, especially if you want to dig up like the defense Carl gave to alt-right white nationalists and stuff like that at their protest, right? Like the Charlottesville stuff, right? He on stream with Millennial Woes, you can find it around there, came out with the Heather Heyer died of a heart attack thing. Bought it hook, line, and sinker, promoted it all through that stuff. So fuck this guy being a disingenuous piece of shit over this stuff, right? Like, I don't want and I'll say this right here, I don't want all the burning, the rioting, the looting and stuff. I don't want that part to be associated with the movement. I don't approve of it or anything like that. But when Black Lives Matter formed 6 years ago, right? And there's been some change under the Obama administration on what they could do, but certainly nothing under the Trump administration to reform that stuff. Like, so while, if we go back to like the, oh God, what's the guy from Ferguson? Michael Brown, his death, right? So while the DOJ under Obama ruled, or they came to that, it wasn't murder or anything like that and all that other stuff, they also came out and had a whole list, had a whole study, a whole report that showed there was a lot of systemic racism within the Ferguson Police Department that needed to be fixed, right? And so what I'm saying about this is we've had all these peaceful protests for the last 6 years. Not a whole lot has changed for African Americans, and especially like the police brutality stuff. There's not been the police reform that we need, and eventually it's just the powder cake's gonna blow up, and it's gonna spill over into more of this violence, right, across the board, even when people are still in this time are trying to be peaceful protesters, right? So it's an unfortunate side effect of our failure to properly act, both the past administrations and especially here the Trump administration. And Trump is not helping the situation anymore. That does that with there. So he goes to shill.